Hello there guys and welcome back. Much like the last video, this is a remake of response to one of my first videos. MauLer and EFAPs' worst take. Avatar: The Last Airbender. I doubt you need me to tell you how good this show is. There have been plenty of YouTubers who have already done that. But there's this video that barely anyone has touched. MauLer's discussion of Literature Devil in the show after his infamous announcement that he thought the show wasn't very good. I responded to most of it in the first two videos, and I abandoned part 3 in order to respond to his Reddit thread where he tried to double down on his points as well as him trashing the fanbase. This video will be remaking the first two since they're the ones that contain most of his points. I'm not going any further than that, but I think this should be thorough enough for most to be satisfied with it. And much like my Cosmonaut video, this video will be addressing some of the criticism I've gotten over the past 2 years since those videos have been out. Speaking of which, there is one I need to address right now because it needs attention first. One comment I got was that MauLer's EFAP was just a casual discourse with a friend, not a critique. That his suggestions are to just make the show more enjoyable for him, that it's just his opinion.
That's a nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Starting off with the fact that MauLer has never allowed anyone to use, in my opinion, to shield themselves from criticism, the same logic should apply to him naturally. Never in the preamble of his video did he ever once say that his criticisms were just opinions, nor does he ever say this throughout the rest of the video. In fact, he says something that suggests the opposite.
And obviously I'm coming from the perspective that I would call the show subpar. Like, if I was to put it on a 10 scale, it's like a 4. Which I know is very controversial. I'm like, oh boy.
That's something you're not supposed to say.
I'm calling the show subpar, a 4 out of 10. That sounds like a critique to me, just like any of his other EFAPs. Besides that he takes pot shots at it multiple times in his server, despite the fact that he apparently doesn't care. I'm not even going to respond to that, that hit the nail on the head in the comments. As for the show being more enjoyable for him, first off, his comments on the captain slipping up, the reason why Zuko has his coma at the time he has it, amongst other things, are factual statements. Or more accurately, attempts at factual statements. Don't worry, we're getting to those in due time. If he wanted to just say he personally didn't enjoy the show, that's fine, as I said last time. But he is clearly attempting to make cogent points that people parrot. If he wanted to go the I just didn't like it crowd, he should have done something similar to what my friend said in one of his hot takes video.
Now, to start off my hot takes, I don't like Lord of the Rings all that much. They're not bad films at all. I just genuinely do not give a flying fuck about wizards and magic and dragons and shit. They just don't interest me at all. I've tried watching Lord of the Rings films at least 4 to 5 times, and every single time I fall asleep, and I just don't care.
But he didn't. He tried to criticize the show with weak points. Now there are people trying to go above and beyond to defend him. If he based this off a level of logic, then he's subjecting himself to having that logic challenged. There is no limit to whose points can be refuted. Take a look at Mavlic's video on Daredevil. Sure, you could say those guys in the podcast were just having a casual conversation, but it doesn't change the fact that their points against the show were terrible. So Mavlic made a response to it. I'm essentially applying the same logic in this case. If someone says, I enjoy the sky more if it was blue, then you are welcome to tell them that the sky is in fact blue. So I don't want to hear any more of this non-argument. If you don't have anything to say that isn't, he doesn't care, or it's just his opinion, just like what the Cosmonaut fanbase tries to do, don't say anything at all because those are not arguments. Like when people called out Cosmonaut on his bad take on JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. He tried saying that it was just his opinion, but many of his talking points were still weak and inaccurate points against the show, and just like MauLer, people rightfully called Cosmonaut out on it. So just because someone or their fans say, in my opinion, that doesn't make some impenetrable shield from criticism. Now with all that out of the way, let us rip and tear it into EFAP's worst take of all time.
So you probably agree that a lot of the stakes, at least for the end of Season 2, are built by the idea that if he is killed in the Avatar state, the Avatar's gone forever, that will break the cycle.
Right. Yeah, that's as far as I remember, they mentioned that if he is in the Avatar state, he's killed, breaks the Avatar cycle. I'm not really sure how they know that.
That was going to be my question, because this is the thing. When it was first introduced, I could have asked if I asked Wolf or not, but I remember just thinking in my head like, how would you know? Because you'd be dead, Mr. Avatar.
Considering that I didn't start off strong with this argument last time, I'm going to revise this section. First off, this doesn't contradict any previously established information that we've been told before in the Avatar state, and its purpose is to set up stakes for Aang if he dies in that state. Thus meaning it provides good reasoning as to why he can't just use it in every fight, because it increases his risk for getting killed. So it helps with the stakes of the fight scenes by covering for what could otherwise been a plot hole. Besides the fact that he doesn't know how to control the Avatar state, but we're discussing that later. Plus, as LitDev and some of the other commenters have said, there is enough ambiguity in both this show's magic system, especially involving the spirit realm, to where it could be reasonably assumed that the past avatars know about this information. It also doesn't even matter how exactly they got this information, considering its function in the story, and there's enough room left for an inference to just accept it with little to no problem. Plus, I think it's disingenuous to say the stakes of the entirety of Season 2 are built around this piece of information, since most of the stakes of Season 2 is Aang starting and struggling to learn earthbending, as well as what's left of the Earth Kingdom being taken over by the Fire Nation. That's what this season is about. So for those that might claim that just inferring how the spirits got this info isn't good enough since it's significant to the plot, it really isn't. It really only applies to the last 5 minutes of the Season 2 finale where Aang is dying, and that's it. And Aang losing his ability to use the Avatar state in Season 3 is because of the lightning strike blocking off his cosmic chakra, not the death of the Avatar spirit. So this bit of lore doesn't impact the season as a whole.
I guess. So Aang's been frozen for 100 years.
Right.
And he wakes up, or he's woken up, by what I think a lot of people would call like it wasn't like a cause and effect thing. It was like, oh my goodness, like he's stumbled across, which is fine. But within the next few months, if my timeline's correct, he like is able to sort of deal with two what I would call very, at least by the world's rules, from what I understand, extremely rare galactic events that like had he woken up a few months, or let's say a year later, he would have lost, essentially. Like, the Fire Nation would have taken over completely because of Sozin's Comet. So, I guess what I'm saying is, like, wow, it's really convenient timing that he managed to wake up before what they establish is going to be their only chance to take out the Fire Nation during the Black Sun, and before Sozin's Comet fully arrived.
Okay, this is a problem because... why? I really don't get this point, because all it's doing is setting up the show's premise. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Isn't it convenient that in A New Hope, the droids find Luke, who is the son of Darth Vader, that Vader's old master is hiding on the same planet, as well as Leia being Luke's sister, who's also on the same ship that the droids came from, convenient as well? I know you or some others might say this is more of an observation instead of a criticism, but if that's so, why bring it up in the first place? By the way you word it, as well as the tone of your voice, you make it sound as though you take issue with it. Like in your Winter Soldier EFAP, you criticize how convenient it was that Bucky was the Winter Soldier, despite that it was said in the first Avenger that his supposed death was intentionally left open to leave room for him to come back, since we don't see his body. Even though in your Force Awakens critique, you literally have a tangent of how convenience isn't bad as long as it's not contrived. So convenience is alright, except when it comes to Atla and Winter Soldier. Right. A saying I once heard is, if you're not going to write the most interesting story, why even write anything at all? And this is far from the only time you complain about this, so I'll go into it in more detail as we go along.
Okay, because, so the next thing, this is something I was just sticking in the old noggin. So, they make a big deal about how the Avatar can speak to the past Avatar, specifically Roku, by going to, it's like a fire temple, and he needs to enter the temple's like sacred room. Once the light from the winter solstice hits the statue's eyes, he can speak with Roku directly. I think the way he's made aware of that is through Roku's dragon in the spirit world.
Enter the spirit world, and he was able to be guided there by Goku.
Yeah,
Roku.
Goku.
Roku's animal.
So yeah, so it's like a huge deal when he finally gets to speak to him, and obviously he learns a lot of important stuff from that. But then there are other instances where Roku sort of casually shows up, and it confuses me a little bit. You've got when Aang is out like in the middle of the ocean and he's really down on like his motivation, Roku shows up and gives him a bit of an Obi-Wan style, like, Luke, let's get going, buddy. Like, you gotta do it. This is important. He's in the the finale, where well, I think it's the one before the finale. I can't remember. When he's talking to about killing Ozai, like obviously Roku gives his perspective on that one. I assume he would have been, let's say, in Aang's head in some degree when he becomes Godzilla at the end of season 1, because like I doubt Aang knew what he was doing with that. It was more the other avatars. Then there's do you remember Zhong, the Fire Nation, Fire Teacher, Firebender? He's like,
was he part of the Lotus Club?
Yes.
Or,
so he's like, I'm not going to teach you, Aang, because you're too. I think he says he's too reckless or something like that, or weak. I think it is. And Roku just shows up and he's like, "Hey, teach him." And he's like, "Okay, geez, I'll do it." And it's like, man, Roku could just sort of, because they made like a huge deal out of it, but then it just sort of seems that he could just show up where he wants to, when he wants to, and I'm just like, man, why isn't he like teaching Aang? I don't see why he isn't telling Aang more as these seasons go on. Like, they're desperately in need of a firebending teacher, and it's like, I don't know, maybe Roku, like, he could probably do it. And, you know, if you were like, you can't firebend as a spirit, I'd be like, no, you don't need to. Just show him the techniques and give him the, you know, Yoda style. Like, you need to do the thing with the thing. And you're like,
At the end of their first meeting, Roku says this.
But I won't be able to come back to the temple. What if I have questions? How will I talk to you?
I am a part of you. When you need to talk to me again, you will find a way.
So this line confirms that Roku is able to appear when Aang needs him desperately. The reason it was made a big deal to get to the temple before the solstice ends, because Aang, up to this point, has never been to the spirit world, nor does he know how to get there. So the whole purpose of those 2 episodes was for him to learn how to communicate with the spirits and be more attuned to their world. As for Roku teaching Aang firebending, for one, spirits can't bend.
What? I can't airbend in the spirit world.
Before you bring up the at least teach him some basics point, Roku is a spirit, a projection of his physical self at most. So learning from him is basically like trying to learn martial arts from YouTube videos with no proper instructor. And fire is a very dangerous element. Without proper control, it can lead to hurting someone or destroying something, which actually happens when Aang tries to use firebending unsupervised. The whole point of learning the elements is to learn about the rest of the world and the philosophies of those elements. Since he is the protector of the world, he needs to learn this crap in order for there to be balance. Thus meaning, Aang needs an actual teacher. John was able to see Roku because he is the member of White Lotus, some of the most spiritually attuned people besides the Avatar himself, such as how Iroh was able to see the spirits when the soldiers could not. So that makes enough sense.
The water monster one at the end of season 1, but I'd rather focus on the war one. You have this scenario where they are living in his air temple area, but the only reason they've been allowed to stay there is because they're providing weapons to the Fire Nation, right? Well, it's like, oh, alright, there's some ethical stuff here. Okay, I'm liking it. This is good. Aang is told, like, he's highly aware of the scenario being, like, important, and he knows how important himself being there is to the Fire Nation, like, because they're searching for him. And so the Fire Nation guy turns up, and he's like, give me my weapons, and then Aang, like, bursts out, and he's like, fuck you, go away, and blows him away, and then he's like, you'll pay for this, and then, like, once he's left, they immediately start planning for war, and I was immediately just like, geez, Aang, like, if you would, like, I know you don't want the Fire Nation to have weapons, they've already got a shit ton of weapons, by the way, but you're gonna put this community that's, like, half children in a position where they're about to, like, fight a war, and they're throwing, like, stink bombs, or whatever those things are, like this horrifying army that are gonna execute them if they can. But my problem goes further, because do you remember they have that, like, gas deposit at the bottom of the area, and they...
The methane gas, something like that?
Yeah, like, they smell it through one of the bottom chambers of their area, and they put rotten eggs in it, because they know if they smell eggs, they'll know that's where the gas is, I guess. And so they can smell it in, like, this chasm, and so they throw their, I guess, like, the sort of heater thing that's applied to the balloon into it, and explodes, and it, like, fills the screen. Like, the entire castle is taken up by flames, and then all the Fire Nation are just shown to be defeated, and they're like, yeah, and I was like, you couldn't possibly have done that without killing somebody.
Right? Wrong.
To start, it's not out of character for Aang to get mad and to tell the Firebender General to go away. First off, Aang is pretty mad at the Mechanists for desecrating his home, and things get way worse when he learns that he's using one of his own homes as a factory for war for the same country that genocided his people. And Aang is shown to act irrationally when he's angry. Like how earlier in the episode he gets mad that they tore down one mural in order to make room for a bathroom, or in time he gets really pissed at the Sandbenders when he confronts them about taking Appa, along with a few other examples. Plus, he's a kid, and kids tend to act irrationally at times that their brains aren't fully developed, and they tend to have outbursts when they're angry. And Aang had to stop him right away, or otherwise he would have gotten the weapon and used it to potentially win the war, which would cause many more deaths in the long term. And Aang wasn't the one who caused the explosion, it was Sokka. It's perfectly within character for him to kill. One comment says that Aang should have felt guilty for his actions, but here's the thing, it shouldn't. Aang knows they are in war. He doesn't berate Earth Kingdom soldiers or World Tribe warriors in the north for killing their own defense. He may be a pacifist personally, but in the same way he's okay with Sokka eating meat, he doesn't judge others for having to kill. He simply holds himself to a higher moral standard. And it was a collective agreement that they would defend themselves, so it's on them for whatever life they take, not Aang's. As for his actions leading to those deaths, from Aang's point of view, that's not his fault. Let's take the show's finale for example. When he talks to Kyoshi, he says this.
But you didn't really kill Shin. Technically, he fell to his own doom because he was too stubborn to get out of the way.
Personally, I don't really see the difference.
He doesn't view that act as Kyoshi killing, but she personally doesn't see the difference. But as far as Aang is concerned, as long as he didn't personally strike them down or anything like that, it's not killing or leading to their deaths. And it doesn't matter if you agree with that mindset, it's just simply the mindset he has, and that's perfectly fine. God, this reminds me of the time MauLer and them criticized Captain America and Winter Soldier destroying the helicarriers. Even though he was wounded by Bucky with no way of escaping, which meant all Bucky had to do was kill him or knock him out and switch to targeting blades, thus meaning millions would die. Plus the SHIELD agents and many civilians have already evacuated anyway. Plus, it's part of his character that if you try to save everyone, you might lose sight of what must be done.
It's a job. We try to save as many people as we can. Sometimes it doesn't mean everybody. But if we can't find a way to live with that, next time, maybe nobody gets saved.
And the blades only controlled the targeting systems, not the entire vessels, so they couldn't drown the helicarriers like what they suggested. Plus, not to mention, drowning them would likely cause the water to overflow, still causing casualties. God, their EFAP on that movie sucked. It's amazing that the comment section of both of these videos are way better than any arguments the defenders brought up. Anyway, moving on.
I wanna focus on the whole they pilfered his people's temple to make their own place. That was enough for me. Just going over that,
Yeah.
having him deal with it. Because they don't really deal with that. He has the war, and then at the end of the episode he's like the hermit crab that takes its shell from something else, you guys have made something new out of the place you're in. Woohoo, credits. I was like, wow.
Have you ever heard of character development, my friend? Aang's old arc in this episode is learning to accept the people being there. Yes, while he was mad at them at first, as the episode progresses, he starts to accept them. After learning how they were basically abused by the Fire Nation and seeing that they are in a way still respect and carry on his culture, he realizes that they are not too dissimilar from his people.
Even though Teo's not an airbender, he really does have the spirit of one.
He's come to realize that it's their home now, they have the right to be there just like him. Wait to cut out context to make your point, which is going to be a theme throughout this entire video.
Waiting for his characterization that we've seen up to that point, where he
thought it
might
would
not
be
see
super
or
interesting
comprehend.
to have the, because everybody condemns the dad's character, and I was like watching, I was like, I don't know, man, like, I think that I'm on his side. Like, this place.
Which dad?
The guy who's making weapons for the Fire Nation in order to have his community stay in the Air Temple. I'm like, I mean, yes, it's bad that you're giving them more strength, but I mean, if your options are that or die, you know, maybe that wasn't the option. And I think that episode could have focused on that idea, and then also mixing in the whole like taking something for your own, and especially like, I feel like that probably should have been a couple of episodes of Aang.
As I said last time, We are meant to empathize with the Mechanist, but that doesn't excuse his actions. Yeah, he did it in order to make sure his people got to live in the temple, but at the cost of many lives by making machines of war. If the scientists helped the Nazis make the gas chambers, even though he did it to save his own family, would you still try to defend him? I hope not. While we understand why he did it, it was still ultimately selfish to do it for your own sake at the cost of everyone else. He essentially took the quick and easy route instead of the harder alternative. Not to mention, they're just kids, as I said earlier, so it just makes even more sense for him to have an extreme reaction to this. And Mechanist does give us a chance of redemption by helping them with the battle, as well as helping them during the Black Sun invasion. So it's not like the show demonizes him to a ridiculous degree that there's no nuance in the situation.
What sort of bothers me about that episode is that the Fire Nation know that Aang, or that the Airbender is there. Like, they would have had a lot of visual confirmation, obviously. So either they conclude that he is there, and so they'll send multiple, factions of their own forces to get there and to get him, or they get there and realize he's not there, but they still would have. They'll take the place back. That's a place where they were defeated in warfare by this enormous, absurd explosion that obviously they can't pull that trick again. So I guess my point is, like, Aang leaving them, like, is to their doom. But they show up in Season 3, and I was like, oh, I guess they're okay.
Well, the answer to that is simple. There is no strategic advantage to attack the temple again, because they already have what they came for, the balloon. That was the whole reason they attacked to begin with. And with it, this loss is very inconsequential, because it's going to allow them to have many more victories down the line.
This defeat is the gateway to many victories.
And if they wanted to attack them again, they can just wait until the fleet is ready and attack them then, which is way easier than having to scale the mountain to go get them. And even if they were to try to do that again, the Mechanist and his people would likely have enough time to set up their own defenses to counter tanks, or could just run away since they have the gliders to make a quick getaway. So it's honestly not a problem that they don't attack again.
But you will, but... So our team is heading toward attacking the Fire Nation, and they're in the water, and as they're traveling across, the Fire Nation lift this huge net, and
oh yeah.
So, first thing in my head, I was just like, well, you can cut steel with water, so you can obviously cut a net with water. That's probably not going to be that hard. But then they set the net on fire, the Fire Nation do. Like, that's even more threatening. And I was just like, will that destroy the net? Like, but okay, fine, let's assume the net is just flame retardant. No, wait, simultaneously flammable but not destroyable? I don't know. Surely you could put out the fire with the waterbending. Like, Katara at that point has been shown to, like, cause tsunamis, so, like, I don't see...
Like, make rain and everything.
But they're all like, oh god, what are we gonna do? And then they engage with their submarine plan, which, then again, in my head, I was just like, why didn't you open with this? That's, like, stealthy and really effective, and it'll just, like, drop you all off exactly where you need to go. And I just don't see why a fire net was the thing that, that screwed them up. I was
Okay, how can they just put the fire out? Take a look. The gate is huge. And even if Katara and the other warbenders were able to put it out, it wouldn't matter because 5 seconds later the gate will just reignite since the source of the fire comes from the statue itself, which is generating a crap ton of fire. And by the looks of the material, it looks like it's made of some type of metal or flexible material which looks feasibly flameproof, unlike what would happen is made out of rope, so it makes enough sense. As for our subs, they do explain that they have a limited air supply, so they needed to take a break before they can make it to the capital.
Wouldn't fix. The subs have a limited air supply. Before we land on the beaches, we'll need to resurface.
And considering that this is a time-sensitive mission where they have to get there by the time the eclipse starts, so if they started with the subs, they would have to take multiple breaks, which would just be wasting precious time.
What's the boxing thing say? Yeah, yes.
Do you remember... Because when I was watching it, I was like, oh no, Aang needs to get all the animals in the area out into, like, a zoo that he's going to create. And he does this thing where he blows really hard on his Appa flute thing, and it, like, essentially gets all the animals in the area to, like, single file approach wherever he wants. And I was thinking, like, at first you're like, oh, there you go, neat. Then I was like, oh, damn. So Aang knew that he could do that. Like, do you know how many animals they fought across these 3 seasons in total that he just never uses that against? Do you remember the, like, army of weird beetle things that they fought?
Oh, yeah.
Just like, damn, bro, use that shit. Get them all to walk single file off a cliff. Something, I don't know. And I think obviously they were trying to have some fun with an anthology thing, and I was just like, you just gave him a superpower. I wouldn't have done that if I were you.
Maybe he just learned it. Maybe he just learned that trick. I don't know. Maybe it only works on domesticated animals.
Season 2, and I think there are examples of season 1 and 3 that have like animal-related enemies to do battle with in some way, shape, or form.
I don't know. I think the Tales of Ba Sing Se isn't really something you think about too much because I mean, after he makes a zoo, there's no repercussions. He just destroyed all the stuff. He freed all these animals.
Isn't it
they
nuts
made a brand
that
new zoo.
He made a zoo in wartime. It's like it's on the outside of the wall.
There's a few things to keep in mind. First off, the only thing the whistle does is make the animals follow Aang. It isn't any type of mind control to make him do whatever he wants. So if they did that on all the animals they follow, all that will do is just make them follow Aang, and once he stops blowing, they'll just attack him again. Plus, just because it worked on these smaller, more domesticated zoo animals, that doesn't mean it would work on much larger, more vicious animals. Especially those that are more amphibious, since from what it looks like, all the Ba Sing animals are more mammal-like, similar to Appa. And sending him off of a cliff would be out of character for Aang, because that could potentially kill them, and Aang wouldn't kill anyone, even animals, which is why he doesn't eat meat. And lastly, there's never a scenario where Aang or his team are losing against an animal which will require them to use it. This isn't like the hold-up maneuver, where there are several times where the losing side of a space battle could just use this to turn the tide of any battle in an instant. It would only apply to a handful of situations where, as I said just a second ago, it honestly probably wouldn't even work. And the zoo is perfectly safe. Just like last time, they're in a valley between the inner and the outer walls, so they're still protected by the outer defenses, meaning that they're perfectly safe.
You're like, holy shit, is it all over? Like that sort of moment. And then Katara is able to heal him because she has the Healy juice that was established season... was that season 1 or 2? I can't remember. I think it was, season 1.
She had some special, very special healing water she had.
Right.
Like that.
Which, you know, if that was the only thing, I'd be like, okay, fine. It's kind of like you got to have your cake and eat it. You got to show the audience the worst possible thing ever, him getting killed in the Avatar state, and you got to have him survive. You're like, alright. But that's not my issue. Katara let Jet die. Because she has...
I mean, forget that guy.
She
let him die. Who
she
cares?
has, like, super Healy juice that could bring people back when they've apparently, like... Because Aang was almost essentially deceased while he's on Appa, while Jet was like, I'll be okay. And then Toph is like, he's not going to be okay. That's, like, something I really liked, by the way, was Toph could detect he was lying when he said that. I thought it was good. Katara is, like... She's, like... I don't know if she's tearing up or anything, but she's really upset because she does her standard water bending, and she's like, I don't think she's going to be able to save him. And I was like, use the super juice. And I thought to myself, oh, super juice probably can't save someone if they've, you know, received mortal damage. And then I was like, oh no, it can. That's like its point, is that it does a super heal. I was like, oh.
I just thought she didn't want to.
Oh.
I just thought, like, I mean, she might have liked Jet or whatever. Like, there were enemies at one time.
He was doing the hero stuff at that point, right?
Yeah, he was saving them. I mean, saving them, but he wasn't really part of the main cast, and that stuff is rare. So, I mean, you're on your own, Jet.
I still think that's an indictment on her character. I've always thought she was the kind to, like, she would save someone even if she would save Ozai, even if, like, if he was, like, screaming in pain, she'd probably help him.
Look, here's the thing.
Fine. Listen,
I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded.
Oh boy. This one-line stupidity honestly blows your credibility out of the water at this point, if it didn't already. Katara would not save Ozai, period. Sure, she is nice and compassionate and all that, but just because she's nice, she's not this angelic heavenly creature like Rey, who is nice to everyone all the time. She has moments where she gets irrational, angry, and at one point even threatens Zuko's life if he ever does anything to hurt Aang.
You make one step backward, one slip up, give me one reason to think you might hurt Aang, and you won't have to worry about your destiny anymore. Because I'll make sure your destiny ends, right then and there. Permanently.
You seem to have a flenderized version of her in your head, which goes to show you don't have an understanding of the characters, which is going to be apparent throughout this entire video. As for Jet, she didn't just let him die. He and his team took the choice out of her hands and lied to her that it would be alright. Even Longshot, the one guy who hasn't spoken a word in all of his appearances, says it's okay.
There's no time. Just go. We'll take care of him. He's our leader.
Let's never mind the fact that she tried to heal him to begin with. Plus, she also needs the spirit water for dire situations where Aang to be fatally injured, which does happen. If she used the water on Jet, the world's utterly screwed. Aang is the one person in the whole world who absolutely cannot die. And while it might sound kind of callous, it's ultimately the right thing to do for the sake of the entire world. And she does have some obvious guilt for not trying to do more, so she's not acting out of character in any way either.
Sir.
The other thing I remember about Katara, so do you remember when she uses bloodbending to save Aang and Sokka, and the old lady is like, "Mwahaha." She's like crying because I think she considers it to be essentially unethical bending.
Oh yeah. It was forbidden, I think.
So what bothered me is when she and Zuko are going to hunt down the person who killed her mum, and they have a theory on who it is, and she just runs straight into bloodbending him, right? And you could be like, oh, it's motivated by the fact that she thinks that person killed her mum. It's like, okay. When they find out he's not, she's like, that's not the guy. She just like drops him and moves on, and I was like, damn. I would have thought she would be like, you know, taken aback by the fact that she's just committed to what she considers to be a really horrible act on an, you know, quote unquote innocent person. He didn't kill her mother, he's just a guy. And she seems to have a huge issue with doing it to just people in general. And so I was like disappointed she wasn't like shocked at herself in any way. She's just like, alright, moving on. It's like, oh.
As I just mentioned a minute ago, Katara isn't this all-loving messiah that you seem to think that she is. She is shown to have a deep-seated hatred for the Fire Nation, especially since they killed her mother. And her personal mission in this episode is to track down the guy who killed her. In this whole episode, especially this scene, it's portrayed as unusual for Katara, which makes this scene very impactful because she's using the same technique that she was crying over in the episode that she used it in. And it causes the audience to question whether or not she's willing to kill the guy that's truly responsible for the murder. And when she does reach the guy, she almost kills him, but even then, she doesn't forgive him. So she does have the capacity for hatred and anger. And it doesn't matter if you personally didn't like how it was handled. It's fine if you don't, but you're saying this is a flaw of the writing, like what LD unbelievably agreed to. And that's another important point I'm going to go more in depth on for another criticism that you have.
No, the old lady wouldn't give a fuck. She would do it. So about that scene, Katara's getting puppeteered until she is able to block the puppeteering, and then she's able to apply the puppeteering to the old lady. Mechanically, I was just confused. I was like, why is any of this happening this way? Just like suddenly Katara can block it, suddenly the old lady can't block Katara doing it.
During this scene, Katara outright says that she is the stronger waterbender.
You're not the only one who draws power from the moon. My bending is more powerful than yours, Hama. Your technique is useless on me.
My first video, I said that since Hama is much older, that should mean she is weaker due to her elderly age. But a good comment I got is that Katara has far more fighting experience than what Hama does, considering Hama would most likely have to hide her bending from the other Fire Nation locals, while Katara has been fighting almost non-stop for most of the show. So has her training from Paul Ku, who is a legendary waterbending master, as well as a member of the White Lotus. All of which are good points, and I can't believe I haven't even thought of that. It all makes sense, so you've got no argument here either.
We're doing okay. Do you remember what happens in this scene?
She brings him up there, and I think Iroh just he takes a stand or something because I don't think they go with her.
Let's pretend to be in like a cool little boardroom right now, and we're right in this scene. So I tell you, we need to get these two to realize this is a ruse because we don't want them to be captured by the Fire Nation. We want them they're going to be on the run for this season. You're like, all right. So ideas. First idea I have would be something like Iroh looking suspicious. We'll establish that he would know full well that something's up. This is weird. Because I'm on board with that, I think that's good. Then have maybe a few of these guards without helmets, like the one to the left, right there, you can see his face. Have them sweating, like they're really uncomfortable, and you could be like, why? I can't remember what else that's in, but that... Oh, Captain America, Winter Soldier, they do that in the elevator.
Oh yeah, he sees that they're sweating and they're nervous and everything.
Yeah, which is a really good giveaway. And then I think you should have maybe Zuko poke Azula about being so nice. He's like, why are you Why are you being like absurdly nice? And then like you could have dialogue that involves like I would have assumed father would consider everything that happened in the previous season to be a failure, and then you can have Azula be like, no, he's impressed like with how well you've done, and then you can have our characters realize like impressed, like this is someone's up. I think there's a lot of ways you can write it, a lot of good ways, because this is a really significant moment. This is going to change their path throughout the whole show, and I'm just gonna show you what happens. Here it is.
Heard the princess! Raise the anchors! We're taking the prisoners home! Your
The part that gets me is his face. He's like, oh, Drews, like, what have I done? Maybe I can show that.
He just messed up under Azula's command. He's dead.
Well, of course, he's
just
he's the captain. Like, it blows my mind he could possibly make this horrendous of a mistake. It's like, the whole point is that they don't discover that they're prisoners. Like, he's like, we're taking the prisoners home. What a strange thing you need to say, you know? And, yeah.
Oh god, this again. Okay, mate. It makes perfect sense as to why the captain slipped up. Let's take a look at what Azula says to him and the crew during her introduction scene.
Can you explain something to me?
Of course, Your Highness.
Do the tides command this ship?
I'm afraid I don't understand.
You said the tides would not allow us to bring the ship in. Do the tides command this ship?
No, Princess.
And if I were to have you thrown overboard, would the tides think twice about smashing you against the rocky shore?
No, Princess.
Well then, maybe you should worry less about the tides, who've already made up their mind about killing you, and worry more about me, who's still mulling it over.
She's literally threatening to kill him if they don't follow in line with her plans or way of thinking. As we're shown in this episode, Azula is a perfectionist. It's both her greatest strength and weakness. So by being threatened by a member of royalty, so as the stress of having to be part of a facade, is an honest mistake to make, since there are many people that would slip up in times of certain stress. Plus, of course, you were laughing. It's meant to be a joke. It also serves its other purposes very well, such as revealing the ruse, giving us a cool action scene, which allows the heroes to escape, showing how formidable Azula is by beating and almost killing Zuko, and shows how conniving she is as well. And your suggestion is literally what the show already did. Azula lured them, claiming Ozai had accepted them back, and considering Zuko's desperation after losing his ship and his crew, he of course accepts. Iroh was already suspicious of them, but he decides to come along with Zuko to protect him. And the captain's slip-up is an honest human mistake, so it's all okay.
Was several, when we're talking a lot of episodes, they will be like, time to train time, we're doing some training, in and amongst different stories. That's good. I think you may have heard that there's some characters that don't require such things, and they can achieve stuff
some
anyway.
Characters just don't need training, they're just gods.
And so,
right from the get-go.
You know, the Godzilla creature at the end of season 1, it'd be like, okay, so his training isn't why he can do that. It's because he's accessing the Avatar state, combining with the koi fish, the power, spirits, all that thing. And so I've got that in my head, and I'm like, so he's training earthbending, airbending, firebending, and waterbending because he needs them to defeat Ozai. Okay. Why wouldn't he just need to get a grip on the Avatar state? What's the relevance of all those other things when the Avatar state is what annihilates Ozai? Like, he has all the elements floating around him. He's just this ball of like fuck you energy and just like destroys him. Like, what I guess I wanted to see was like he uses the water whip to counter a move from Ozai. He uses like all the different moves that he's sort of been taught over the season and defeats in that way, like no Avatar state. Especially because what I liked was they were kind of building this whole like Avatar state is what is like a final resort, and he doesn't even like it because it's not him anymore. It's more a collective of people, and so
yeah,
like if he can, I think like a climax would have been really awesome to have him almost go into the Avatar state, pull back, and then beat Ozai his own way without actually having to use it. But instead,
that'd be interesting. Yeah,
he goes full Avatar state and sort of destroys him, with the incredible powers that are all being provided from, you know, thousands of years of history from all these other avatars. Like, yeah, that's fine with me. I was just like, at this point, I'm like, man, that intro is kind of funny now. It's like, he's, you know, his airbending is great, but he needs to trade all the other things to defeat Ozai. It's just like, does he though? Like, it doesn't really... Yeah.
A very low IQ person.
Wow, you really did not pay attention to the show, did you? They literally spent the entire first episode of Season 2 to explain why. Aang doesn't know how to get a grip on the Avatar state. Outside the 2 instances of him being possessed by spirits in Season 1, he's only able to enter the Avatar state with extreme cases of fear, anger, and grief. The general tries to exploit this, but it only leads to terrible repercussions. Aang, for like 2/3 of the whole series, doesn't even know how to trigger it at will. It's only through the help of the Guru during the finale of Season 2, and then when he finally undergoes training in order to master it. You forgetting this just shows just how out of touch you are with the show. Well, of course, I got a comment trying to defend this, claiming that I said MauLer didn't watch this episode, that he's just trying to say he would prefer it if the Avatar state wasn't used in the finale. First off, I never said that he didn't watch it. I mean, his point on the captain slipping up, as well as the whole plot hole of how the other avatars know about the death in the Avatar state come from that episode. So of course he would have had to seen it. And just like what I said a second ago, I'm pointing out an explanation that's in the show which he seems to be forgetting, which is why he made the point of why couldn't Aang just use the Avatar state from the very beginning to win the whole show. As for your point on the final fight against Ozai, Aang does in fact use what he's learned throughout the show, such as the lightning deflection Zuko taught him, the rock armor Toph uses, as well as her seismic vision, as well as several bits of water bending as well. There are multiple other examples as well that I haven't even listed, and Aang is up against Ozai, one of the most powerful firebenders as is, and he's also juiced up from Sozin's Comet. That is not an easy opponent to beat, so there's nothing wrong with using the Avatar state in this fight. Some say that Aang using the Avatar state in the fight diminishes his journey of learning the elements because he's relying on the knowledge of past avatars instead of his own, but I disagree. Aang still needed the knowledge of using the elements in order to bend them, and he still uses what he's learned during that part of the fight as well.
Fucking moving the whole show, and Aang actually uses some of Toph's hand movements for it too. She's the only person we've ever seen use these motions, so that's a cool detail too.
He is still using this knowledge to win the day, which is pretty good writing and makes his journey feel worth it.
He killed the moon?
Yes. So, he found out about the coming eclipse and what eclipses do to the Fire Nation when he was in the library in the desert. And he burnt all of the information because it reveals the Fire Nation's weakness. He doesn't want anyone finding it. It's like, yep, that makes sense. It's surprising that very few firebenders seem to even be, like, as far as I'm aware, it's literally just him and the people he has told, which is very few people. You'd think, because this is going to get complicated, right? Try and stay with me, because I even confuse myself. When they discover, Sokka and Aang discover that the Eclipse is the key to taking the Fire Nation's power away, they need to find a day when that happens again, right? They need to, so they can prepare for war. And Sokka says, like, we can't check every day, that's ridiculous. And he's like, no, we need to check from today up to Sozin's Comet, because that's the only time frame we can use, because Sozin's Comet is game over. So we got to get it in that time zone. And so they search those days while the building is filling with sand, because Toph is trying to prevent it from going further into the ground, but obviously the owl has opened up, I guess, windows and stuff to let sand from the outside pour in. But it just, like, this is a nitpick. It just stops pouring when they start searching all of the days. I was just like, this is fine. So they search, and they find an eclipse. Like, if you're telling me that these eclipses happen once per 100 years, they were lucky as hell to get that one between then and Sozin's Comet, which in universe time, I want to say is a couple months? I can't remember exactly, but it's a small amount of time. Simultaneously, because if you wanted to say to me, like, oh, well, you know, they get an eclipse every couple of months. So it kind of makes sense that they'd find one. It's like, yeah, but then everyone would know, right? Because every couple of months, all of the Fire Nation would be like, damn, my firebending's gone.
It wouldn't be that big of a secret.
How'd you get the idea that the eclipse happens only once every 100 years? They never say that in the show. nor even in the wiki for that matter, nor does it take place every few months. If that was the case, an eclipse would have happened multiple times during the show, but it only happens once. A comment said that either it's convenient that the eclipse occurred before the comet, or that the Fire Nation should know about it if it happens too frequently. That's honestly not that big of a deal. Is it convenient? Sure, but just as I said earlier in this response, if you're not going to write anything interesting, why write it at all? There's nothing that suggests in the show that makes it impossible. I think the long comment that responded to MauLer put this very well. Who goes around saying, by the way, for every few minutes every 16 years or so, my entire civilization becomes unable to use our key magic system. Considering eclipses only happen for a few minutes, it isn't much time to catch on that firebenders are powerless, especially since there is only one known recorded instance of it that was hidden in the library. Since it isn't like Sozin's Comet, which is recorded to happen every 100 years, eclipses happen in a much more random pattern that's hard to pinpoint. To put it simply, it's not really an issue at all. Lastly, the sand doesn't just stop pouring. Toph is holding the library in place, which is slowing down the sand, but not outright stopping it. And considering how big the library is, it'll take a while for the whole place to be submerged, so this isn't plot armor or anything like that.
Final fight with at the end of this season 3. I thought it was really cool that he used the seismic ability that he'd learned from Toph to counter Ozai, but I remember, so this was something I was going to bring up as a positive, and then I was like, why did he do that? Because obviously, if you're facing someone, you won't need that. Because you can see them moving, right? And you check the scene. He's in the air with his big old powerful elemental stuff. Ozai is on like a platform, and Aang lands with his back to Ozai. Like, I have no idea why he does that, and then Ozai goes to do a thing and it activates the seismic thing, and I was like, why? Like, you wanted to give a reason for why he'd use the seismic ability? Why did you make him turn his back on the Ozai at the peak of the, like, climax of the battle? That was just such a weird thing for me.
What the fuck? That's, like, wrong in 8 different ways.
God, this is such a dogshit criticism. Aang is turning his back on Ozai because he almost broke his rule on killing, and he is stopping himself at the very last possible second. And he's feeling guilt over that.
So, explaining the motivation behind why a character makes a decision, in this case why Aang chose to turn his back on Ozai, doesn't counter the criticism that it is solely pointing out, unless said criticism implies it was out of character. That being, it's a tactically bad decision.
This is what we'll call backseat criticism. Just because a character does something that isn't logical, that doesn't make it bad writing. As long as it makes sense for a character to do it, it's perfectly fine. Just ignoring why someone makes a character-driven decision and being like, well, it's still a bad logical decision. Yeah, I don't care. If it's a character, go complain about it on Reddit. I'll be diving deeper into this type of criticism again. I know I keep saying that. There are multiple patterns in both MauLer's video, as well as his comments argumentation, that need to be pointed out multiple times in order to show how flawed they are, and when we get there, I'll be able to dissect on why they're wrong in so many instances, so be patient.
He locks him down and then energy bends the flumps out of him.
Yeah.
I was surprised that Rock stops him. If you remember, Azula breaks out of Rock handcuffs just by using fire.
Yeah.
So I'd be surprised that Ozai, on the day of Sozin's Comet, he didn't even fire breathe, like, which is, I'm pretty sure you can do that.
If you take a look, Ozai's hands are outside the rocks, not encased in them, so he can't just blast them, unlike Azula, who is able to pivot herself on the wall to get herself in a better position to destroy her restraints. As for like Ozai didn't breathe fire, need I elaborate any more?
Do you remember when Appa is captured?
Yes, he was captured by. Wasn't he captured by Zuko or somebody?
It was like it's like a Fire Nation circus thing.
Yeah, that's it.
And so the problem with Appa
Aang's
is
really
he's like, I'm gonna tame you because you're a crazy dude. And every time he tries to like prevent Appa from getting food, Appa finds like there's like two. He like airbends food toward him, and this kid gave him something to eat as well. And so, and then we move on to like this scene where it's clear that the guy is going to use Appa as like an attraction. And so the first confusion I had when I was watching this was like, oh my god, he's got like chains on his ankles, I guess. And I was like, oh, that must prevent him from flying, because obviously if he could fly, he'd just escape. But then I realized that his act requires him to fly through fire hoops. And I was like, oh, so why doesn't he just escape? Again, I hope I don't get flagged for copyright with this one. So the thing is like, oh, maybe it's that dude with the fire whip. And it's like, well, I mean, Appa could just fly out right now. But instead he's like sort of playing along for a moment. And then he gets singed and he's like, ow, that hurts. And then this happens. I love
he slaps it down.
It just looks so funny. For those who can't see it, Appa hits a hoop and the hoop just bogs the dude right on the head. And yeah, so I'm just confused, like, Appa just fly away, right? And then I was thinking to myself, like, oh, there's gonna be a reason why he can't, I guess. And he ends up, like, just booting this dude. You can check this out.
Well, Appa's awesome.
Appa is awesome. And then he just flies out. And I was like, oh. What an awful...
Doesn't need to be here anymore.
Why? Like, I just... It was, like, how stupid does that circus owner have to be? I don't know.
Nice to see you're taking stuff out of context, like how you basically admitted to in your Reddit thread. In the prior scene, the circus keeper literally threatened Appa with fire if he tried to escape. And as we see in this episode, Appa is scared of fire, which makes sense because he's constantly being shot at throughout the entire series, and even burnt a little on a couple of occasions. And Appa is an animal, and animals in circuses, or just captivity in general, often threatened and even abused in order for them to keep in line to do what the keepers want. Appa only finds the courage to escape when he sees the boy that was nice to him earlier since he reminded him of Aang. You even show this in your own footage, but you completely missed it. Wow.
Lucky that someone who knows you very well happened upon you in this area. Someone who cares about you to the point that they pluck those things out of him, they feed him, they rest him up, and he's back to full health. And I was just like, wow. And then fucking Azula and the two girls just show up, because apparently they were keeping an eye on the fur, and they saw some, and they just went to this place. I was blown away. I was just like, what? Why is everyone just showing up?
It might be convenient, sure, but it makes sense. Azula followed the trail of fur like what she did earlier in the season. Since Appa just escaped a Fire Nation circus and Tyler used to be at the circus, it could have used that as a lead. And the Kyoshi warriors were already aware that Appa is missing, and they are part of the Earth Kingdom military, so it makes sense for them to be there as well. As for them being up at the same time, I'm saving that for the next convenience argument, since that's when I plan to show my hand. But I'll give you credit for the criticism on the Warriors not noticing the destruction from earlier. Even though that is pretty nitpicky, I'll give you props for that.
So this one's a bit, if you remember how, Katara's origin story, if you will. So, someone found out that they were, because the Southern Tribe has any waterbenders captured / killed. Let's just say killed, because they get killed on sight, apparently. But yeah, another one is born, right? Or at least there is one there. That's all. Apparently, an informant told the Fire Nation this alone. There is a waterbender in the Southern Tribe. We're like, okay. So they go there, and there's like this big fight going on. But we find out that it is Katara is the one that's actually able to waterbend. But Katara's mother claims to be the waterbender. And she's like, take me away. And the guy's like, nope, we're going to kill you. And she obviously dies for her. I thought it was really strange, right? Because the Fire Nation are in a position where they want to essentially eradicate the other benders. At least that's not my assumption. Because the next bender's going to be... The next avatar will be a water one. Assuming the air one's dead, which I think they assume. So they're wiping out the waterbenders, which makes sense to me. They're wiping out the people in the Southern Tribe whenever a waterbender rises or is heard about. They're like, kill it, kill it, kill it. Part that blows my mind is that, like, if we turned up, let's say me and you were the Grand Fire Nation Inquisitor people, and we're gonna kill that waterbender, we show up and this person just says, I'm totally the waterbender, you have to kill me. I'd be like, uh-huh. So, do me a favor and just waterbend a little bit, just so I can confirm it. Otherwise, I'll kill your whole village, because I've been sent to kill one, there's one here. I'm not going to let someone take a bullet here, Spartacus style. We're just going to get the one, alright? And it's a very definitive system. You cannot fake waterbending. And funnily enough...
This one's honestly pretty simple. Katara was just told to find her dad, so the soldier guy took too long. Katara's dad would show up and likely kill him. and the other warriors were holding their own against the raiders pretty well. It's not like they have the means to take control of the village due to not having enough forces to do so. This is clearly meant to be a hit-and-run attack, since after he does kill her, they leave instantly. He has no leverage over the mother to force her to use her water bending. Since the Fire Nation generally have a shoot first, ask questions later type of mentality, it's honestly in character for them to make an honest mistake like this.
Oh, and I'm sorry about that. You know how they get to the planetarium thing in that library? Like a fox spirit is just like, hey, over here. And like, I get it, spirits want to help about and stuff, but like, holy shit. It really feels like a writing tool where it's like, I don't know how they get there, fucking spirit shows them. Like, okay.
Look here! Look, listen!
Now it's time to show my full deck. Okay, mate. A handful of minor conveniences in a 60-plus episode show is perfectly fine. And as I mentioned in my response to your Reddit thread, you treat any and all convenience in the show like it's Satan himself. Conveniences can happen, as long as the conveniences aren't core to the characters or story progression. Little convenience is fine for any story. Is it convenient that Aang woke up before the comet? Is it convenient that Azula and the Kyoshi warriors found Appa? Is it convenient that the wolf helped them out, even though it's clearly only doing it for its own gain since it's a librarian is part of its job? Sure. But name me any story, whether it's a video game, book, movie, or TV show, which doesn't have a handful of these conveniences every now and then. Just as I said, as long as conveniences aren't the main core of characters or how the story progresses, it's fine. As well as if the conveniences make sense, happen naturally instead of being contrived, and aren't so astronomical they're basically impossible, they're okay. Not unlike to say, like in Black Widow, when the two found themselves in the exact same vent Nat and Clit hid in about 10 years earlier, of all places, which was impossible to believe as well as just making flat out no sense. Or in The Last Jedi, where even the smallest Star Destroyers aren't able to catch up to Resistance fleet, because if they did, they would be able to catch up with them and the movie would be over. Those are types of conveniences that are straight up bad for storytelling. If you were to say in Black Widow it's convenient that Nat's sister is the one that's freed in the beginning of the movie, I would say yeah, that's convenient, but it doesn't break anything. It's just used to try to make the story a little bit more interesting. I say tried because that movie was a disaster, but the point is that would be a convenience that is okay, especially if the rest of the movie was good. The only convenience complaint that you honestly have that's honestly criticizable is the rock hitting Aang at just the right place in order for him to regain the ability to use the Avatar state. Since that does affect character and story progression in a significant way, just to happen with little to no build up. But everything else you say just comes across as grasping for straws to say anything bad about the show. So you have to have these double standards against it, be like, look how convenient this is. Especially considering you said in your thread you thought Code Geass was good, which my friend reading it with me was very surprised to hear about. Especially considering how Season 2 relies on a convenience at the finale of Season 1 in order to happen, and it's both contrived and out of character, as well as contradicting how the Geass works. If that was an Atla, you will bitch all day on how terrible that is, and how this show is the most overrated piece of media in history, which you already do anyway, but somehow you still think Geass is good despite that, and it just blows my mind.
So, you remember Azula turns up with her two gal pals and they're dressed in the Daily outfit. Was it the Yamashu?
The Kyoshi?
Kyoshi, that's the one.
Yeah.
Those warriors are trusted, and of course he's like, oh, you guys can help us, and they're like, mwahaha. The first thing the Earth King tells them, or I guess it's the Earth King, he's like, hey, they're coming up with this great plan to attack the Fire Nation during a solar eclipse where they're at their weakest. And like, Azula just lifts up her head like, oh! I was just like, oh, jeez. Like, because he's a bubbling fool character.
Yeah,
I was just like, oh.
The Earth King is an idiot.
Yeah. That's like, you know, like, I'll let him have that. The part that gets me is that, Sokka meets them, and he's like, clearly aware, because he's obviously her off again, on again girlfriend is Kyoshi Warrior. He sees their outfits and he manages to not conclude in any way, shape, or form that they would have stolen it from them, meaning they're compromised, meaning Suki's potentially compromised, meaning their whole plan for the eclipse is compromised.
The Earth King literally has no military experience, and is generally pretty ignorant due to being inside the palace his whole life, which is basically his bubble, meaning that his actions match up perfectly with his history, so it's all in character. And plus, he was literally told by the main characters that the Kyoshi warriors were trustworthy, since they are friends with Team Avatar, and they're also part of the Earth Kingdom military. Zuko wasn't even there to identify them, since he was flying with Aang to go see his dad, so that's why that didn't happen.
Okay, yeah, so Azula finds out that a faction of people in the Earth capital are against the Earth King, and so naturally she's like, let's maybe work with those guys. So her plan is, I'm going to get captured, and then I'm going to meet with their leader. And I was just like watching it like, whoa, like that's super risky. Why can't you just instead be like, hey Earth King, can I speak to your prisoners to try and find out what their plans are for blah blah blah, you know? She's a Kyoshi warrior, you can trust her. Instead her plan, and I was just like, man, what if you were just imprisoned indefinitely? Because she's captured by the Dai Li.
Yeah.
And the Dai Li bring her to their leader, and then she manages to broker a deal with the leader, and I was just like, dude, careful. Like, all kinds of things could have happened as a result of that.
No, it's not really that risky. First off, she's a master manipulator, and she knows how to talk to people and persuade them to her side, so she's pretty damn confident that she can pull this off. And even if she doesn't, she has both Mei and Ty Lee bust her out if necessary. For why they couldn't just use her facade to interrogate Longfeng, well, the Kyoshi warriors have no prior history with them whatsoever, so it seemed pretty suspicious they just all of a sudden knew about him and wanted to talk to him. And what reason would they want to interrogate him? He's already proven to be conspiring against the Earth King, so he's already dead to rights guilty, and there's pretty much just nothing else to get out of him.
So yeah, in the first episode of season 3, Aang like has a bit of a crisis and tries to go off on his own, and he almost like drowns in the ocean because he can't quite get through it. And then he's given like a pep talk by Roku and the Moon Spirit, and like immediately after he goes full like water bending pro tsunami mode, where he's just like traveling through the ocean really fast, like fucking Aquaman stuff. And I was just like, did you not know you could do this before? I was like, okay.
You seem to be forgetting that there is a Fire Navy blockade that protects the country. So if he did it at the wrong time, he would have been spotted, and since the world thinks he's dead at this point, he needs to stay hidden. The waters were also pretty rough and dangerous. It was only when Yue calmed the waters down when he was able to use the tidal wave. Plus Yue helped him out with that as well.
So, Team Avatar have provided a guide in Ba Sing Se called Judy, and when she fails to prevent them from getting to the upper ring party, she's taken to the lake for brainwashing, I guess. And she's replaced with another guide for them who claims to be the literal same person. And they're like, no, you're not. She's like, yes, I am. They're like, whoa. It's like nice and eerie and creepy. I kind of like it. But then it gets weird because you find out that loads of women are being brainwashed into becoming Judy specifically. And like, the first time I saw that, I was like, why would you just have them be different women? Like, one of them could be Judy, one of them could be, you know, Jane. you can make a bunch. And so from there, Team Avatar are like unnerved, naturally. I think we'd all would be.
I think they would be.
2 episodes later, I think, the old Judy comes back. She like knocks on the door and they're like, oh my god, old Judy. And she's like, no, I've always been this Judy. And they're like, and then they're like, how is this possible? How do you switch bodies? How? And she's just like, nope, I'm always Judy. And there's this weird moment, like, you could go check out the scene, people listen to this. They, she just, like, brushes that off, and then they go, so why are you here? And I was like, whoa, what? No, we can't just skip over the fact that we've got this lady that switches bodies. Like, you kidding me? And then she's, like, ignored by them, and, she goes back to Longfeng, like, this following scene, and she explains that, like, they don't trust her, and he's, like, disappointed and wants her to be brainwashed again. And I was like, what did you expect? You've been giving them different bodies. Like,
They are suspicious about this, but there's currently nothing they can do about it at that point. They were told earlier about Longfeng. They tried to tell other people in the inner parts of the city about the war or do anything else that was out of line. They'll be expelled from the city, meaning they won't be able to find and rescue Appa. If you notice, which I doubt you did since you openly admitted that you were only watching the show while playing a game on a second monitor, that all the women are being brainwashed at once, which would make it far easier to manage them as opposed to performing it on each one of them separately. All they have to do is just hypnotize them, send each one to different households so no one will notice, and if someone does, they will be too afraid to speak about because if they did, they'll be taken away by the Dai Li to be brainwashed just like Jet.
There. How did Aang and Appa survive being frozen for 100 years?
Just cause.
It's just definitely just cause. Because I've had some people tell me it's like Avatar state. I was like, Appa's not in the Avatar state.
How did I guess it's just? I think it's just traditional movie logic. You're trapped in ice, you can live forever. It's just the matter of you getting thawed out. Because Captain America went through the same thing. He said young, he was frozen in ice.
Yeah, well, because I probably levy the same criticism against the MCU for that one. It's kind of just like you don't. In the same way, right? Because you can get away with that, quote unquote, but principally you shouldn't get away with it. And what I mean by that is like, we have a character who's ejected into space and he's floating around out there, and then someone grabs him one day and brings him back down, and he's a character again. Be like, how the hell did he survive? You're like, oh, you know.
This is what's called suspended animation. Similar to the cryopods in sci-fi such as Halo or Aliens, where all bodily functions are shut down, but the subject in question isn't dead and can still survive and not even age for several years. But how is this possible in Allo where it's fantasy and not sci-fi? Well, there have been reported cases of suspended animation happening in real life multiple times. It's been used as a way to treat patients in order to give them a long enough window to be performed on to save their lives. It's even possible for it to happen in nature as well. And Aang used airbending powered by the Avatar state to freeze him and Appa almost instantly. As opposed to the case of Zuko, where he was in the North Tundra well below freezing temperatures, which would have slowly led to hypothermia, frostbite, and death due to other cold-related injuries. As for Captain America, he is a super soldier with far greater capabilities such as enhanced durability that would have easily killed most regular humans, and his bodily functions are enhanced as well, such as his metabolism.
This serum wouldn't just affect my muscles, it would affect my cells. Create a protective system of regeneration and healing.
So out of all the non-superpowered characters in Marvel, I would say he is one of the ones I would say has the best chance of surviving being frozen. Hey, that's twice why I'll defend the Captain America in this video. Huh. And considering that both fantasy and sci-fi tend to exaggerate real-world concepts all the time, I think this is something that shouldn't really be questioned, because this is kinda just movie logic at this point.
So here's a question. How did the Fire Nation attack and destroy all of the air nomads in their air temples when you can only access them through flight?
Aang actually asked that question. He's like, in the first few episodes, there's no way that they conquered the air temples because you have to get to there by flight, and then they get over there and they're all conquered. So I guess maybe they burrowed underneath somehow, or maybe it don't really answer that question. You just figure out that they did. You know that they did, but you don't know how.
There's some stuff to work with. Being first and foremost, they did attack them during Sozin's comet passing, and we know that Ozai can fly while Sozin's comet is passing.
Yeah,
so
and I think Azula can fly on her own normally, just with jet boots.
Can she?
Jet boots technique. Yeah, she has a jet boots technique where she can put fire underneath her feet. That's how she was able to survive a fall, I think.
Huh. Jesus, she's OP. Well, yeah, cool. I mean, because I know that Katara almost kind of sort of uses a flight type thing at the end of season 2. She just needs a large body of water, I think.
But aren't the air temples on a mountain? It could have been so.
Well, this was the thing. I was going to say, let's say, because not all the Fire Nation can fly. We know that because like Sokka's plan in the finale relies on that. If some of them got up there, I'm not like the air people. They're pretty good at their jobs, right? They'd be able to, because I feel like air would be a really good counter to fire. Blast a flame at you, and you just bloop it back, and you can use. I don't know. It is.
Are you sure about that?
We've been shown multiple times that non-airbenders are able to make their way to the temples. The Fire Nation also had dragons back then, so they could have used those as well. As for the quote you mentioned, Aang doesn't want to believe that his people are gone. He is trying to remain optimistic, even foolishly so, that at least some of his people are still alive, and doesn't want to have to accept the fact that he is the last airbender left. When it comes to the Fire Nation's attack on the airbenders, you need to keep a few things in mind. The air nomads were pacifists. They didn't have a formal army, so most of them have little to no combat experience.
The air nomads didn't have a formal military. Sozin defeated them by ambush.
And more importantly, the firebenders would have been boosted by Sozin's comet, which he exploited to wipe out all the air nomads, which is what started the whole war in the first place.
They wouldn't be that big of a deal, but that's his weakness, is tea.
This is more of a dissatisfaction one as well, but Sokka spends that whole episode like acquiring his space sword, and he uses it a couple times. He ends up throwing it at a platform, and it slices through it almost magically because it's an amazing throw.
My space sword.
And then it just falls, and he's lost it forever. I was like, why did they do that? Rip space sword.
Sokka throws away his sword because if he didn't, he and Toph would die. They fell from a high place, causing Sokka to break his leg, and had to hold Toph with one of his hands to keep her from falling. On top of this, there were 2 soldiers that were about to burn them to death. Sokka takes out one of his boomerangs, but since it wasn't coming back, he had to use his sword as a last-ditch effort to save their lives. I had one comment, and to be clear, I'm not saying this comment was bad. In fact, it's actually pretty good. He said that he thought MauLer was simply more disappointed with the cool factor of the sword that was made out of an asteroid and had an entire episode dedicated to it, only for it to be thrown away. And that's fair, but it's not to respond to it in this way anyway, just for the sake of being as thorough as I can. Maybe this criticism was a bit of both, honestly. I can't really respond to the latter point, other than that it's just him being subjective, so there's nothing really to comment on besides that.
Is it that an eclipse prevents firebending when the sun is still there, and it still actually is shooting out some level of light, like it's not pitch black, but then nighttime doesn't take their power away?
On that part, I'm not really sure. Like, it could be because traditionally, like in mysticism and everything, eclipses are not just blocking out the sun. It has a whole bunch of other mystical elements to it. So it might be that the eclipse here is not just blocking of the sun. It might also be doing something else. Because I think it's the moon too. Does it ever tell you what exactly is blocking out the sun? Because usually something to do with the shadows.
Oh, so this is the interesting thing, right? Because my first thought was it's the moon and the lunar eclipse, solar eclipse, whatever. And so with the moon spirit and moon blah blah, I was like, there's got to be maybe some argument there for why it's fucking with the firebenders. But then I was like, surely like at nighttime when the moon is just chilling out there, that would have to fuck with firebenders at that point, right? Like, I'm sure they are depowered, but I don't see why they wouldn't just lose their ability entirely if that's what it does when they get an eclipse.
Well, we're told that waterbenders are stronger during the nighttime, especially when it is the full moon, but they can still bend during the day even though they're not as powerful. The same logic applies to the Fire Nation. They can still bend at night even though they aren't as powerful. Zuko even points this out.
You rise with the moon. I rise with the sun.
The moon gets its light from the sun by reflecting the sun's light, which is why the moon is still bright at nighttime. So the solar rays from the sun are still available to fuel the firebender's chi, even at night, as opposed to the eclipse where the solar rays are pretty much completely blocked off, preventing them from using their powers.
You're a team of people who don't want the king to find out that there's a war going on. This team are now aware that this team of kids have been into their underground facility, and they're probably going to tell the king about it. So, and this is when I was watching it, I was like, well, they're earthbenders. They're just going to fill in that whole area, surely. And they do. And I was like, hey, nice. And then one of the characters is like, what about the drill? And I was like, what? And it was like, yeah, what about the drill? Let's go get if the drill's there, then it's proof that the war is happening. And the drill is still there. And I was like, whoa. So, to really get my point across, I saw the drill and I was like, oh my god, it's been weeks, and they didn't remove the Fire Nation symbol for one, put a roof on top of they put walls around it, they didn't put a roof on it so you could just see it from the castle walls. They didn't fill the space with earth, right? You could just do that quickly. Like, you could do that in a half hour if you knew that, you know, it's a danger, which they do, because they took the precaution of fucking, like, filling in their entire holding facility and their brainwashing facility. And then finally, why didn't you just bury the drill? You can actually build an area around it once it's buried to, you know, do whatever you want. Like, because there's a theory like, oh, well, they were scavenging it, and it's like, yeah, push it down, build a area, and then go to town.
For starters, it hasn't been that long. They've only been in Ba Sing Se for 3 episodes at this point. From what we can tell, they've only been there for like a week and a half at most. Earthbenders haven't discovered metal bending yet either, since Toph doesn't learn that until a little bit later. And the armor is impervious to any earthbending. Alongside that, the drill is massive. It's going to take several weeks, if not potentially months, to strip the entire thing down. And we don't even know if scrapping the Fire Nation symbol is even possible, since it looks like it's branded into the hull of the drill itself. And even if that was possible, they can just get confirmation from the general and his men that defended the wall. Yep, that's right. There's a different general in charge of the wall, not the Dai Li. The Dai Li are only the secret police of the city. They're not in charge of its outer defenses. And even if they put a roof over the drill, the key can just order Dai Li or soldiers to tear it down, or Aang and Toph can just do it themselves. It makes perfect sense that it's still there.
So something that didn't quite sit well with me was Zuko at the beginning of season 2 is told that all is forgiven, he can come home and sit by his father's side, like that's the thing that he really wants. And of course, Azula's betrayal is revealed by that very, very useful captain.
Take the prisoners away. Prisoners?
Wait a minute. And Azula says, like, you're a failure. The only way you're ever returning home is in a prison cell, or something like that. And obviously, Zuko's, like, shaking in that scene, and I really like it, because, like, that's probably the most earth-shattering news you could ever experience. The whole goal of redemption has just been spat out, in the sense that you can't actually redeem yourself now, you're fucked. And
especially
to the point...
Zuko.
Yeah, and you also have to consider that she's just dramatically betrayed him under their father's orders, which is very intense, and then she actually goes for the kill shot on him. She Avada Kedavras him, but Iroh stops it.
Yeah,
that's gonna be intense. Your sister was about to kill you. Yeah, because obviously he doesn't know how to deal with lightning at that point in the story, so he'd be dead.
Yeah, he would have been.
So like, I like all that, apart from the stupid captain. But then at the end of season 2, she's like, if you help me beat the Avatar, you can totally come home. He's like, ooh, and then he eventually takes her up in the offer, and I was like, why would you, like, this woman...
Of course he sides with her. We're shown in the first episode of this season that if Zuko is desperate enough, he will side with Azula since he believes it's the only alternative he has. And Azula's plan to take the city is already in motion, and when she inevitably wins, the Fire Nation will take over the city, and Zuko and Iroh will continue to be fugitives of the Fire Nation. And they traveled to Ba Sing Se in the first place, because up to that point, it was the safest place for him to avoid the Fire Nation. And Azula is stronger than Zuko. If he tried to fight her again, she'll likely beat him and either capture or kill him. If Zuko helps her to take out the city, ending the war in favor of their country, that should be enough in of itself to earn his right to the throne back and be accepted again. Everything Zuko has ever wanted up to this point will be his again. It all honestly makes sense coming from Zuko's perspective as to why he chose the decision at this point in the series. And for these last 2 points, I decided to stitch them together because I think they exemplify everything that's wrong with MauLer's take on this show and why it's so awful.
Why would Iroh heat up his tea with this firebending when surrounded by refugees from the Fire Nation's war? Like, Zuko calls him out for it, but I was just like, damn, Iroh's supposed to be like one of the smartest characters in the whole show. Why the hell did he do that?
Well, he's wise, but I mean, he has his weaknesses too. He just really likes good hot tea. That's something he can't really do without.
But, like, it could get him and his very surrogate son killed. I thought it was really funny that after Zuko frees Appa, he goes into like a coma, and it's because Iroh says his body, like being an evil man, can't handle the Goodman decision he made. Now, I'm not trying to speak about psychology and how it can affect you physically, right? I'm not saying it's an impossibility. I'm strictly talking about the way that I've sort of accepted all this information. So he's like incredibly stressed because he's done a thing that is just not his position to be doing typically, and so he's just like, ugh. But I would have thought that if you're like supposed to be quote unquote a bad guy, finally choosing to do something good would give you that sense of like, I nailed it. I did a good thing. This feels great. That sort of turning. But let's say, okay, fine. It stresses him out enough that he goes into this like state. The thing for me is like, I really think we should have had that happen after the scene we sort of looked at the beginning of season 2, after his family member tries to kill him and he was baited in by his dad to go to prison. He's like shaking when he fights her, he's like exasperated and obviously he was about to be beaten. I feel like going into some form of a stress coma after that experience would not only be more suitable, but it could be a very physical representation of like the metamorphosis, like, you know, caterpillar into butterfly sort of thing.
Yeah.
while doing it after he frees Appa, strange to me, and I feel like they did it to put him on the shelf for an episode, because it's not until the end and that he's fixed back up to normal. Like they didn't know what they wanted to do with him.
And ever. And ever.
You should be ashamed!
Nice to know the first point is just more backseat criticism. You would have a point if I were using open flame. That would be unbelievably stupid. But he doesn't. He just uses one of his hands to heat the tea, which is the most minimalist form of firebending one can do. That isn't anything suspicious. And the only one who does find suspicious is Jet, and he's a paranoid schizophrenic. His other friends don't even find it suspicious. Not to mention, it's perfectly in character for Iroh to do something like this. In one episode of Season 1, he changes the ship's direction without permission from Zuko just so he could buy himself a new lowest tile from the market. Or even better, earlier in Season 2, finds his plant that either makes great tea or is poisonous. And despite the risk, he tries it out anyway, and you can see how that turned out. This is a character flaw. Now I know that a character flaw and a writing flaw aren't always mutually exclusive. I get that. But I've shown that it's in character for Iroh to do this, and while it's not that big of a deal from his perspective. And just because it's not logical, that doesn't automatically make it bad writing. It's only bad if it either makes no sense for a character to make that decision, or if it makes no sense for him to have that character flaw, or if the flaws aren't explored enough, or just come out of nowhere. Let's take The Last Jedi for example. Some say that Holdo's character flaw is that she's stupid or incompetent, which explains why she made a decision not to tell Poe or the rest of the crew the rest plan to escape the First Order. But the problem is that her being an incompetent leader isn't explored in any meaningful way, and she's brought up to be this great military leader, which goes against this characterization.
That's Admiral Holdo? Battle of Chiron Belt, Admiral Holdo?
Or let's take Doctor Strange from Spider-Man No Way Home. He acts uncharacteristically stupid in that movie, especially at the earlier parts, which serves as the inciting incident for the entire plot of the movie. That goes against his characterization and comes out of nowhere, on top of not being logical. But when it comes to both cases of Iroh and Aang's illogical choices, it makes sense for him to make those decisions. And the show is aware that those aren't logical choices.
Hey! What are you doing firebending your tea? For a wise old man, that was a pretty stupid move.
Even with all the power in the world, you are still weak.
I think Cynical Reviews puts it best in his response video to Patrick Willems.
Right to be unsatisfied. Good writers create conflict and drama in their stories by having their characters act in ways that make sense. One reason why Game of Thrones is so good, excluding season 7 of course, is that its characters don't always act rationally, but their actions can always be explained by reference to their personality. So characters can be impulsive, but they should not be random. Because as soon as they start acting out of character in a way that only serves as a plot device, they stop being believable characters. And if they act in a way that contradicts their previously established personality with no explanation, then that is a valid plot hole. Sometimes, as in the Harry Potter case, yes, but again, it's a matter of degree. Other times, like in Superman Returns, when Lex Luthor wants to own the real estate rights to an entire continent made of kryptonite, which is incapable of sustaining life, the villain's scheme is so obviously stupid that it's unbelievable, especially for a supposed genius like Luthor. Again, it's bad writing. This is also another instance where Patrick uses a bad example. Voldemort chose the Triwizard Cup, and not just any old object, because he has an attachment to certain objects of sentimental value, as established in the franchise. Whereas Luthor's plan is so out of sync with his pre-established character as an evil genius that the film contradicts itself, he stops being a character, and he becomes a plot device. But the real reason that Voldemort's plan is forgivable, but Luthor's is not, is that the latter is so nonsensical that it has a major impact on the integrity of the narrative itself. Characters do not always have to act logically, but they cannot act randomly. Their actions have to be plausible.
Now for the criticism of Zuko's coma. Zuko tries to capture Appa, so that way Aang wouldn't have any way to escape from him again. But Iroh catches onto him and follows him to Dai base and confronts him. He berates Zuko for not thinking things through, which is what happened at the North Pole. He then proceeds to say this.
Is it your own destiny? Or is it a destiny someone else has tried to force on you?
Stop it, Uncle. I have to do this!
I'm begging you, Prince Zuko. It's time for you to look inward and begin asking yourself the big questions. Who are you? And what do you want?
This weighs heavily on Zuko's mind. For the entire show up to this point, he's been doing everything he can to regain his father's approval, and he's allowed Ozai to determine his destiny rather than doing that for himself. He's mentally torn, and he starts to question everything he strived for and believed in, and his life's goals. Mostly because he was a bad guy doing something good, that's incredibly reductive. The whole point of this is to show his inner turmoil and to set up his eventual redemption. To put it simply, he couldn't have his coma at the beginning of the season. He was still confident in who he is and who he wanted to be up to that point.
My name is Zuko, son of Ursa and Fire Lord Ozai, Prince of the Fire Nation and heir to the throne.
He still tries to capture Aang in order to bring him to the Fire Nation and to be accepted back. So it makes no sense for him to have it at that point in time. A pushback I got for this is that the writers could just simply make Zuko lose his confidence earlier as long as the explanation didn't contradict itself. This is not how character development works. Sure, the writers can do whatever they want, but doesn't mean they should do whatever they want. An arc like this needs to be set up and built towards over a long period of time. It can't just happen on a whim. In order for Zuko's conflict and redemption to be believable, it needs proper care and thorough exploration and development. And before we wrap up, we need to address this commenter in order to make this video as airtight as possible. You may have noticed a pattern with his comment on how it's just MauLer's suggestions and opinions and all of that. He claims that I act like someone can't disagree with the choices the head writers made while understanding them. But the problem is that MauLer doesn't understand them. He clearly has no understanding of the characters, the plot, and the lore of the show because he gets things just wrong constantly. And as I said at the beginning of this video, he's just not giving his opinion. Like when he critiques why they didn't use the Godzilla koi fish monster, he's clearly trying to poke holes in the plot of the show when he doesn't understand the world building as to why. That's because it was only possible when Shao killed the moon spirit. It's because the brother, the ocean, possessed Aang and is seeking retribution against Shao and his forces. It's only when the moon spirit is brought back to life by Yue's sacrifice is when it stops attacking. So the only way they can replicate this is by killing the fish again, and I don't need to explain what that is out of character for Aang and his team. Or when MauLer criticized like Roku was unable to defeat the volcano with the Avatar state when one firebending Avatar could control 4. This is a false equivalency because Roku was at the mouth of the volcano as opposed to the other Avatar who was at a very safe distance. And Roku is also having to deal with the poison gases constantly bombarding him. The commenter claimed MauLer's just pointing out that Roku looks less impressive because of that scene, but when you listen to his full criticism, that's clearly not the intention.
Who's representative of like a fire avatar, and he bursts and controls 4 volcanoes at the same time. And I was just like, why would you show me that, and then also show me Roku having incredible trouble in the avatar state trying to deal with 1 volcano?
Maybe that guy knew the secrets and he couldn't tap into that guy's secrets. I don't know.
It's just that because, like, you know, I'm not gonna pull out the he's old defense because that's a meme in my community. But when you're in the avatar state, you have the knowledge and power. I'm assuming you are vulnerable, of course, but you're still extremely powerful. I was surprised that he was defeated by that volcano. To be honest with you.
MauLer is yet again trying to make factual criticisms against the show, but the commenter steelmans MauLer at basically every turn, basically acting like some of the Cosmonauts fans I've dealt with in the past who tried the "my opinions" defense. And yes, that is steelmanning. Since he tried to twist what MauLer has said in order to make what he looks better, look better than what it actually is, even though it's clearly not the case. And I find that he criticizes me for using that as a buzzword when he uses words like authorial intent as the buzzword of the hour to argue against me. Like when he claimed I was using authorial intent when I point out Aang didn't cause the explosion, or when I point out that the goddamn General of the Wall was responsible for its defenses and not the Dai Li explaining why the drill is still there. It's only authorial intent if you're using the intentions of the creators to defend something that isn't well communicated, or if something's poorly done to defend the product. Like if I said that the reason the drill is still there is because the writers need the characters to convince the Earth King that the war is real, that would apply to that case, but I didn't do anything of the sort. Not now, not then. So how about next time you try to be consistent with what you say instead of berating one guy for doing something when you do it all the time. And if you don't have anything else that isn't just, it's just his opinion, or any of that garbage that MauLer himself doesn't let other people hide behind, just don't say anything at all. And that's not because I don't like criticism. In fact, I've gotten plenty of good and valid criticism the past 2 years. I've gotten plenty of good valid criticism for the past 2 years to my original series, and so I take those to the heart this time. Like Michael Stone's comment, while I don't agree with what he said, as shown by comments responding to him, I have a far greater respect for this comment than this guy because he doesn't try shielding MauLer with some opinionated bullshit and just try to respond to it how it was. And I think that's going to be the end of the video. I'm not going to make the outro too long because I bet this video is going to be long enough. I just want to say that this video is not a personal attack on MauLer or EFAP. I just disagree with their take on the show and to point out why they are wrong. So don't attack them, alright? We already have enough people doing that right now anyway. Anyway, that's all for now. Until next time.